taking a look at 8 players that we believe could be some of the absolute safest to draft in fantasy football this season because of their high floors, their good offensive situation, whatever it may be for them. But we're going to skip over some of the more obvious names, players going in the first rounds like Christian McCaffrey and CeeDee Lamb and stuff like that. So, Dave, kick us off here. We're going to talk about 8 players, and we're going to start with the quarterbacks. Dave, talk to us about Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, we don't want to talk about the obvious names here, so I'm going to give you a deep cut. This guy Patrick Mahomes, you might want to familiarize yourself. Pretty good football player, but really, I mean, what it comes down to right now is that he is getting suppressed in ADP. A lot of rankings have him going as QB4 right now, which is understandable. He's coming off of a down year after he was getting drafted as the overall QB1. But I want to put some context behind this down year. All right. His down year last year that has caused so many fantasy managers to sour on him. He was still the QB8. You look at what he's done since taking over as a starter in in 2018, he was the QB1. The next year, QB7. The next year, QB4. The next year, QB4. Then we got another QB1 finish. Then last year, he bottomed out at QB8. That was in a situation where he had no wide receivers. I mean, this guy's throwing to Kadarius Toney, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Sky Moore, an injured Travis Kelce, Jerick McKinnon, like just a bunch of nobodies, and he was still able to give us top 8 production. Now, going into this year, they've completely overhauled their wide receiving core. They brought in Xavier Worthy in the draft. They signed Hollywood Brown. It's going to be a much better situation for Patrick Mahomes to be in. And I just want to look at what he's done since taking over as a starter. You're basically looking at a floor of being QB8 like we saw last year with a ceiling of being QB1, which he's done multiple times throughout his career. So I understand why he's falling in drafts right now, regularly going behind Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, and Lamar Jackson. But this is the best football player we've ever seen step on a field. He gives us a safe floor and a high ceiling. I just feel like I need to remind people, like it's tough to move him up and say he's the QB1 or the QB2 this year. But that discounted window that we're getting right now where you can draft Patrick Mahomes as a QB4 off the board just feels like a cheat code. And I am drafting a ton of Mahomes this year.
Yeah, right now, Patrick Mahomes' average draft position for him, it's early drafts, right? We just started the month of July. He's going as the quarterback 3, which is in the 4th round. And I would say that if you are trying to have one of those building blocks on your team, 4th round, you're looking around, maybe you missed out on a Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts, some of those elite premium tier fantasy quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes is a pretty nice consolation prize when you're sitting there and you want to get one of those elite quarterbacks, maybe to pair with Travis Kelce or pair with any number of the wide receivers they have on their team this year. So, I'm not going to fault you for that one. He was a player that I was looking at as well. What I do want to ask,
A
though,
layup.
is
It's very much so a layup. I'm
it
not digging
is,
deep
right?
here, but this is a guy who, like, has multiple seasons over 5,000 yards. He's thrown for 50 touchdowns in a game, and then you look I feel like
Wait, did you
the
say 50 touchdowns in a game? I
50
think that's a
touchdowns in a
record.
season. Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, hasn't done it yet. That's the hurdle we still need to
Yet.
see from Patrick Mahomes is a 50 touchdown game, but maybe this year. But in all honesty, like this team has drastically changed the way that they played football. You go back and you watch Patrick Mahomes in 2018, 2019, and it is almost exclusively deep shots. Like he is just letting the ball fly deep downfield. And now with the growing trend of too high safety coverage, putting the shell coverage over the top of defenses, we haven't seen those deep shots anymore. And Patrick Mahomes has changed up his gameplay a lot where he's taking what the defense gives him. And that's why you see these low ADOT players, Rashee Rice and Kadarius Toney and Travis Kelce and Isiah Pacheco and Jerick McKinnon being the focal points of the offense last year. But now I think that the draft pick of Xavier Worthy and the signing of Hollywood Brown is kind of the antidote to the too high shell coverage that we've seen over the last couple of years. I don't know if it's going to work, but I think that the Chiefs were very intentional in bringing these players in because they do have the speed and the versatility to get behind defenses. So if we can start to see that leak back into Patrick Mahomes' game, being able to take these big shots deep downfield and hit the big plays, the 60, 70, 80-yard touchdowns, then we can see Mahomes return to the guy that he was just 2 years ago when he finishes the overall QB1.
It's nuts to think that Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs could be better than they've
Yeah.
been. Like they won a Super Bowl. What are we talking about? And
Yeah,
they
but I
could be
mean,
better.
when you go from MVS and Kadarius Toney playing significant snap shares where they're on the field and you get to swap those guys out for Xavier Worthy and Hollywood Brown, it's hard to imagine this offense gets worse than it was last year.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. And we might be talking about another Chiefs player here pretty soon. Pretty soon. I don't know. I really like the way that the Kansas City Chiefs offense is looking this year. But before we keep going, we've got ourselves a giveaway. We did this on our last episode as well, and I'm going to get to that in just a moment. But if you're watching here on YouTube, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment down below. Maybe you think Dave is crazy for thinking that Patrick Mahomes is a safe player. You daredevil, you. This episode's going to go off the rails pretty soon. But also, you can just drop in some comments of players that you think are safe that maybe we left out of this episode. And to let you guys know about the giveaway, we've got a podcast giveaway. We're giving out a Scott Fishbowl spot. All you need to do, subscribe on Apple or Spotify, and please leave a review after you finish listening to the episode. Okay, finish the episode. Just give us a very honest review. 5 stars are always appreciated. Take a screenshot of that review. Send it over to abrown@footballguys.com. Last week's winner was JDog on Twitter at RJW615. So we're getting him his Scott Fishbowl spot, but we're going to announce the next winner next Monday, July 8th. It's a great way to finish off the holiday weekend. Dave, any 4th of July plans? Anything cool?
We have our Scott Fish Bowl draft next weekend, actually. So 4th of
4th of
July is
July?
on
Oh,
Thursday, and then we're
okay.
drafting on Saturday. So as much as I'd love to get away, and no, we're going to be staying in town this weekend. Not doing anything on the 4th. I've actually got quite a bit of recordings and work to do on the 4th. You know, the
Oh,
American
big
way,
flex.
but yeah, Scott Fish Bowl draft on Saturday, and then I've got a big hike planned on Sunday. So it'll be a fun weekend, but
There we
not
go.
doing anything on the 4th.
There he is. That sounded very Dave. We got a big hike, big old hike. All right. I'm going to give you my quarterback here that I think is just very safe this year. And I think something that we haven't yet talked about is the safety that comes with the average draft position of these players and what comes baked into where they're being picked. It is such an important factor because not only do you have a player who can give you a high production floor, but you're also not risking a whole lot when you draft them. And I'm going to talk about Dak Prescott right now, whose average draft position is quarterback 9 going in the 7th round. And if you mean to tell me that I can get a guy who is essentially guaranteed to be a QB1 or even just a top 10 QB on the season, and I can draft him as my 7th best player, that means I can fill out the rest of my skill positions, potentially even take CeeDee Lamb in round 1 to stack him with Dak Prescott. I know stacks aren't always necessary in the smaller leagues, but the option is there for you. I really like this. I really like the cost that comes with it. He's one of the more trustworthy fantasy quarterbacks over the last 3 seasons. And I think because of kind of the memification of these players and their teams, we've talked about this with Kyler Murray before, where you get like one Call of Duty meme out there and all of a sudden everyone hates that player. And it's become so easy for society to just hate on the Cowboys, hate on Dak Prescott, whatever it is. But you go back and I looked here. Dak Prescott's been a fantasy QB1, meaning top 12, in nearly 60% of his games played over the last 3 seasons. Only 6 other quarterbacks have been better than that. He's been a top 12 fantasy quarterback in every season that he's played a full schedule. Okay. He has played a full season in all but 2 years. And those 2 years, it was like terrible injuries. Okay. Even the one that comes to mind, Dave,
The ankle.
is the crazy ankle injury where it was like it looked like a Lego where his foot was placed on the wrong way, or it was just awful. And even then, even in those games that he had played, he had been a top 4 quarterback in three of those 4 games so far. So like he was on pace to be a very good quarterback that season. And even last year, he was an MVP candidate at one point. Like we were talking about him as like, hey, I remember it was Lamar, it was Dak, it was Tua. Obviously, it ended up being Lamar who was the MVP. But we were talking about these guys that were really just overperforming. And I don't know. I don't know with Dak if it's really overperforming. I think it's just a guy that we kind of let him go under the radar. We don't give him his flowers all the time. Dallas has now lost their defensive coordinator, Dan Quinn, who's going to be the head coach of the Washington Commanders. So that defense is going to likely have a few issues here. They're going to have to revamp a little bit. Team's going to have to continue to pass the ball a ton, especially without a lack of without a real running attack here. You've got Ezekiel Elliott coming back, but I mean, I don't think we're calling that a real running attack, are we, Dave?
I don't know. I don't know.
Never
I'm
mind.
not
Anyway, I
ready.
don't want to hear
I'm
from
not
you on
ready to
Ezekiel
concede
Elliott. I feel like you've been
washed
high
yet.
on him.
Yeah, I don't know if he's completely washed yet, but we can get into that
Okay, we'll
time
save
on
that for
another
the
show.
special Ezekiel Elliott episode.
But I think with Dak Prescott, I mean, this is a guy who finished as the overall QB1 in I believe it was 2019. Yeah, 2019, and then he got hurt in 2020, and we were drafting him as the overall QB1 in 2020. The one thing that's kind of missed from his game since the injury is his willingness to rush near the end zone, and I'm not sure how much of that came because that's how he was injured, and I don't know if it's a mental hurdle that he's going to have to get over, but, rookie season, 6 touchdowns on the ground. The next season, 6 touchdowns on the ground. The next season, 6 touchdowns on the
Yep,
ground. I mean, he was just doing that, like,
that's
he was
scary.
just rushing a lot, and then after the injury, we haven't seen that. 3 touchdowns the year of the injury, which is the year that he got hurt after just 4 or 5 games. But then the year after, 1 touchdown. The year after, 1 touchdown. Last year, he had 2 touchdowns. So that's what could really raise his ceiling if we start seeing some of that rushing near the goal line again, which really unlocked his ceiling and made him the
The
overall
attempts are
rookie
there.
QB1. Yeah, yeah.
The rushing
I don't have
attempts are
those
there. It's the
numbers. I'd
luck of
like
the
to hear
goal
it.
line stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear. I mean, I like that if he's still rushing, but we haven't seen the touchdown. So yeah, I mean, this guy's still been giving us rock solid production without any elite or even mediocre rushing output. So if he could just start stumbling in the touchdown, like we saw earlier in his career, then all of a sudden we're looking at that ceiling as well. So we've kind of seen the worst case scenario over the last couple of years, and he has still been extremely productive. So not only is he a safe player, but there's also an untapped ceiling here that we haven't seen over the last 4 years that he can revert to.
Yeah, and I think that you and I might even be like a little low. I think it just so much goes into the way we look at rushing quarterbacks and upside, but we're right on par with average draft position. We both have him as the quarterback 9. He's getting drafted as quarterback 9, but I do think as I look at the quarterback rankings here, there's a legit case that he could be seen as quarterback 5 or 6. Like there's a very real reason to have him ahead of a guy like Joe Burrow or
Or CJ
CJ
Stroud.
Stroud.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the only reason you put guys like Anthony Richardson or Kyler Murray ahead of him is because of the rushing upside. But like you said, if some of those touchdowns go the other way for Dak, we're looking at a guy who's potentially a top 3 fantasy quarterback. So I know the anti Cowboy people are going to be just blasting us in the YouTube comments. Good. Feed the algorithm. Your
But no, there's
hate
also gonna be
nourishes us.
I'm also excited for the Cowboys fans that are gonna say, "Finally, somebody putting some respect on Dak's name," because I know Cowboys fans feel that way. They're like, "This is a good quarterback who hasn't gotten the flowers that he deserves." So, here we are, Alfredo, apparently giving Dak his flowers.
Here we are. Look at us. Look at us, the bushwhackers giving out flowers. All right, Dave, let's move on to tight ends. All right, you and I each have a
Mhm.
pair of once again, really solid, very safe tight ends. They're being drafted around each other. So why don't you kick us off here with Evan Ingram? He's being drafted as the tight end 8 in early fantasy drafts. That's around early round 7 here. You and I both have him ranked as the tight end 8, so we're right on par with average draft position.
And this kind of feels like he's like the Dak Prescott of tight ends in a way. Like it's hard to move him higher up the rankings, but we know that he's got a safe floor and he's probably going to outperform that ADP. And we know he's got a high ceiling as well. But we chase the high end range of outcomes with the Sam Laportas and the Dalton Kincaids and the Kyle Pittses and the Trey McBrides, and we're going to draft those guys ahead of them because if the stars alive for them, we know they can be like an 18 point per game type of tight end. I don't know if we're going to see that ceiling from Evan Ingram, but if you look, he was a tight end 2 last year behind only Sam Laporta. And on a usage basis, he had more targets, he had more receptions, he had more yards. He just had some bad touchdown luck. And Laporta, as we know, didn't have that bad touchdown luck. The year before, he was the tight end 5 in Jacksonville. And last year, he led all tight ends in targets. He had 143. Next closest was TJ Hawkinson with 127. Like there was nobody coming close to Evan Ingram and the target volume he was garnering at the tight end position. He has seen elite usage in Jacksonville. He just kind of works as that underneath safety blanket for Lawrence. And I think there's still just kind of a bad taste in a lot of drafters' mouths because of Evan Ingram, former first round pick, had a great rookie season, never really recaptured the magic of his rookie year during his stint in New York. And I think a lot of people remember that. They drafted Evan Ingram highly. He didn't do well for him. And they haven't really seen the progression in his career and what he's done over the last 2 years. He has developed into an elite fantasy tight end. And I don't think that it's overselling it to say that. Like I said, back to back top 5 finishes, including a top 2 finish last year. And I think a lot of people, and I'm a lot of people as well, like I have these guys ranked ahead, but if you miss out on the Laporta, Kincaid, McBride, Pitts, etc., I think Ingram makes for a great arbitrage option late, where you can get him as the tight end 8. he's almost assuredly going to outperform that. And if he maintains the target volume he saw last year, we could be looking at another top 2, top 3 finish.
Yeah, I don't think I'm very scared of Gabe Davis coming in there and taking the volume away from Evan Ingram. If there is someone who can come in and be a party pooper, it's Brian Thomas. But even so, he's not one of those volume hog type of guys. He's going to be creating plays downfield. And I've said this a few times. I love the potential and the talent of Brian Thomas. He does have a little bit that he's going to have to catch up on in the NFL. Like, this is not going to be a just hit the field and go type of player. It's going to take a little bit of time. So I do expect a lot of that offense in Jacksonville early on to go through Travis Etienne, Christian Kirk, and the guy you were just talking about, Evan Ingram. I'm going to move on here. Our next tight end, and these guys are going back to back, or excuse me, not back to back, but right near each other. And I want to talk about George Kittle, tight end 6 in average draft position. He's going in the late 6th round. I've got him as tight end 6. Dave, you've got him as tight end 6. Not great for biblical terms that we're going all the sixes there, but this is a guy that you can count on. He's a safe tight end. You're able to take him at a pretty good spot in your draft. When I was doing my thought process on George Kittle, I was thinking like, man, what am I doing? Like, this is such a volatile player. He misses so much time.
Mhm.
And all those preconceived notions went out the window when by the way, I didn't watch the film. I just like opened up the spreadsheets. So nerds, you win this one. You win this time. But George Kittle has been a tight end 1 in nearly 60% of his games played over the last 3 seasons. That's what we want. We want guys who can not only, like we talked about the consistency thing. We want guys that not only have the good floor because they're so incredibly talented and they can do so much with the ball and they're in a good offense like George Kittle, but that they can also kind of be consistent with it too. The crazy thing with George Kittle, it's not just the high floor, it's the incredibly high ceiling. He can be the tight end 1 overall by a wide margin on any given week because he's just so good after the catch. And when I started peeling into the games, my dude's never missed more than 2 games in a season except for 2020.
Mhm.
The thing is, his name is on the injury report every week, and so we can claim that affects his play. I'm sure it does with all NFL players, but he plays and he gives you the production. Like, it's the crazy thing. So I get that there's just that stress each week, and that's probably what makes fantasy managers say like, I'm done with him. I don't want to deal with that every week of him being questionable or game time decision or whatever. And so I do understand that sort of intangible part of fantasy football, but Kittle's been a top 5 tight end on the year or better in 5 of his last 6 seasons. You kind of know exactly what you're getting with him. And it hasn't mattered when there's been a coaching change, a quarterback change, the addition of Christian McCaffrey, the addition of any of these players, really. Even with Brock Purdy, he's had some of his best touchdown production of his career. And looking at Kittle, he's been a top 10 tight end in roughly 65% of his games last season. After a very weird first couple weeks, the consistency, the floor, it's all there. When I try to do a side by side here, Dave, for comparison, Sam Laporta is pretty much everyone's tight end 1 except for you and I. We still have Travis Kelsey, but people love Sam Laporta. Sam Laporta, who had 4 more touchdowns than George Kittle, only had 1 less game outside of the top 12. We're kind of looking at this and saying, like, okay, if this is the tight end 1 in many people's eyes, and Kittle, or even Ingram for that matter, at tight end 8, there's really not that big of a gap in how often they are a tight end 1 or top 12 tight end. Why are we spending this premium on a guy like Laporta when you can have a high upside, high floor player like George Kittle going in the late 6th, early 7th round? I don't get it. I realize this, and I'm flipping the script here, hopefully well before fantasy football season. I have not drafted enough George Kittle, and I plan to do that more often.
And I remember you and I talking a little bit about George Kittle, like, way back in the spring when I was kinda pounding the table for George Kittle because
Yeah.
there are a lot of misconceptions about him, and, I'm proud of you, Alfredo, for
Thanks.
kind of
Thanks, Dad.
rechanging your perspective on George Kittle because he really has been a lot more consistent than I think people realize, and there are some boomer bust tendencies, especially early in his career, but what we've seen over the last few years is a drastic change in his usage. The big knock we always had against George Kittle was, well, that he's blocking too much, because that is a very good part of his game, and they want to use him as an extension of that offensive line because he helps out the run game and he helps out Christian McCaffrey or when it was Rocky Mostert there. But We're seeing that change quite a bit. Last year, he ran a route on 95.3% of his snaps, which was third highest among all tight ends, and it was a career year for him. And he did that while still maintaining his elite per route run efficiency. He led all tight ends in yards per route run on the third highest route participation of all tight ends. So a lot of numbers, but what I'm telling you is that he's not blocking as much. He's running more routes, and he is still the efficiency monster that he was early in his career. So now we're seeing this guy become a full time receiver while still racking up big plays, getting the deep shots, getting the yards after the catch, making the contested catches, doing all the things that he did earlier in his career, just on a much bigger sample now. Now, we've also talked a lot about the potential of maybe a trade, whether it's Debo Samuel or Brandon Ayuk. If one of those guys is
Even if
out
it
of the
doesn't
picture,
happen.
yeah, even if it doesn't happen, I mean, we're still looking at basically, a top 6, top 8 floor for this guy. But if that does happen and one of those guys is out of the picture, yeah, Ricky Pearsall will step in and he'll be usable. But George Kittle, then all of a sudden his ceiling gets raised to top 1, top 2, top 3 tight end. So much like Evan Ingram, just a good arbitrage option. He's not nearly as sexy as the young guys going ahead of him heading into his age 31 season, but we've seen that tight ends can maintain their elite usage and efficiency into their mid 30s. So we still have a couple years of getting some good juice from George Kittle here.
Do you think he can finish as the tight end 1 overall in a season?
Oh, easily. Yeah, yeah. I mean, with how efficient he is, with how good this offense is, and with his growing usage in the passing game, it's not a question whatsoever.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I get, because then I start to look around and I say, I don't think he can really finish any lower than like tight end 7, and you're
Yeah.
drafting him at tight end 6. I mean, you'd have to have a lot of guys have some big seasons. A lot of the guys that we have going ahead of him, we're either projecting that they're going to have bigger seasons than they've ever had, or they're going to maintain some of the crazy standards that they had last year. Maybe we're nuts. Maybe we're nuts for not having Sam Laporta as the tight end 1, but it just George Kittle feels like a guy who is just incredibly safe, high floor, high upside. I don't get it. I don't get why people don't like him enough. Before we move on, I just want to remind everybody we've got tons of content here on the Football Guys Fantasy Football channel, whether it's for the podcast or YouTube. You can go back and check out all of the great episodes that we've done here with our various guests: Andy Behrens, JJ Zacharies, and the guys from Player Profile. We've had on Julia Papworth. We've been doing some fun stuff with crossovers with the guys from the Dynasty Show, Jagger May and Jeff Bell. We've had Joey Wright. So many great people. And then, of course, you can also just have some episodes where you're just stuck with me and Dave. Whatever. It's not that bad. It's really not. But we've got over the 15 hours of fantasy football content on this YouTube channel. So go ahead and check that out. Look at the video. You can see our beautiful shining faces. Or if you're just an audio person, make sure you are subscribed to that podcast. All right, Dave. Let's move on here. We're going to take a look at some running backs that people might deem boring, but we're just going to call them safe. Super safe. You're talking about Najee Harris, a guy whose average draft position here in early July is the running back 24. He's going in that late 7th, early 8th round, more or less. You've got him as your running back 31 in half PPR. I've got him as the running back 25 in half PPR. By the way, all these rankings you guys can go check them out over on footballguys.com, and it'll be right there under the rankings tab. But talk to us about Najee Harris, because there are so many people who it's once again, it's perception becomes reality. They get out on a player because of a down year. We are all a little bit more panicked because of Arthur Smith, because of Jalen Warren. Talk us back into him and why he's safe, because I think that many people would think he's not safe at all.
Yeah, now this is tough talking about safe running backs because as we talked about, it won't be on YouTube, but for the audio section on the podcast, we talked at length about like what safety means and what positions are important for safety. And all of these safe running backs are going in the first couple of rounds. Christian McCaffrey, Brees Hall, Bijan Robinson. We don't need to tell you that those guys are safe because they're safe. And that's why their draft value dictates where they're going. But
Right.
Najee Harris is a guy that again, I'm below consensus on him, as we talked about, because when it comes to running backs, I like swinging for the fences and looking for the high end range of outcomes, kind of using like an RB2 by committee type of approach to my roster construction. Now, Najee Harris is a guy that I probably don't want to draft and rely on for the entire season. And that's why I'm a little bit lower on him than consensus. But at the end of the day, he's seen 250 plus carries every single year he's been in the league. He's rushed for a minimum 1,000 yards every single year he's been in the league. And there is a little bit of concern that we've seen a downtrend. His targets have gone down every single game since his rookie season. But I kind of look at that 2021 season as an outlier. That was Big Ben on the very twilight of his career, didn't have any arm to push the ball downfield. So he was just see Najee Harris in the flat and check down to him 84 or 94 times. I don't think that's the role that we expect to see Najee Harris in. What we've seen in back to back seasons is a guy who rushes about 250 times for a little over 1,000 yards. What I get excited about with Najee Harris that makes him somewhat safe is that he does have a stranglehold on the goal line usage. He had 23 carries inside the 10 last year compared to Jalen Warren's 8. you know, Not the sexiest guy to draft. We know that. Najee Harris probably leaves a lot to be desired when it comes to his ceiling, but we're not talking about ceiling here. We're talking about safe players. And Najee Harris has been a top 20 running back every single year that he's been in the league. Again, just willing to kind of throw away what we saw his rookie season, looking at his usage and looking over at his production over the last 2 years. Najee is what we would consider to be a safe running back.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now, Dave, and Najee Harris has not been outside of the top 24 running backs in his career, fantasy wise.
Yeah.
And we're looking at a guy that's had 7 touchdowns or more every single year of his career. Like you said, 1,000 yards or more in every single year of his career. What's been trending downwards has been the targets and receptions. In steps Russell Wilson, who we've seen uh, be a little different later in his career, not running as much, getting those dump offs to the running backs. We got Arthur Smith coming in, who we know is going to use running backs and establish the heck out of the run. There's really not too many receiving options there in Pittsburgh. And the kind of the intangible thing we always talk about that's not data driven or whatever is Najee Harris, the team declined his 5th-year option.
Yeah.
And so this is a guy who's going to be on the last year of his contract. He's looking to earn some money. And the team is probably willing to just run him into the ground because they don't have money invested in him.
I think
If you have an expiring asset,
yeah, I think you can go both ways with that argument.
you can, but that's why I'm saying it's
Yeah,
intangible. Like there's nothing that
right.
is 100% proven. You can go either way with that. You could say they don't want him in their offensive plans because he's not signed going
Right.
forward, but you're not looking at that backfield and saying Jalen Warren is going to get like for sure the majority of the carries, especially when it
Yeah.
comes to the goal line. Like it's just it's not likely to happen. I think
I
the
think
thing
what we
with
saw
us,
last year with Arthur Smith, though, like we saw
Mhm.
like Arthur Smith preferred the boring running back for a lot of the
Yeah,
year, where Tyler Algier was, the guy that can really get it done between the tackles, and he got almost all of the goal line work last year. And I think that Najee Harris is much more similar to Tyler Algier, where Bijan Robinson, the versatile, get out there in space, catch passes, that type of running back is a lot more similar to Jalen Warren. So maybe we can see them fall into those similar roles. And if that is the case, then we're just expecting another 250 carries, another 1,000 yards, and another 7 touchdowns from Najee Harris, which isn't going to win you your league, but it's solid production from your RB2 or RB3.
I think it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning. When I think about like what safe players are, it's what is the worst case scenario? And it feels like we've kind of seen that. We saw Najee on a 53% snap share and a really, really bad offense, and he was still the running back 21
Mhm.
with a terrible offensive line. Like there were just so many things not going his way. Listen, I wouldn't be surprised if he remains the top 24 running back. I think just enough of us have been burned by him at his high draft cost year after year after year. And now all of a sudden he's being drafted appropriately. And people are going to have a very safe, very boring running back there. All right. Let's go into another safe running back. Probably not boring though. This guy's a lot of fun to watch play football. We laugh every once in a while at how he runs. But I want to talk about Isiah Pacheco, running back for the Kansas City Chiefs. He's got an average draft position right now of running back 11. That's late third, early fourth round. I've got him as my running back 10 in the rankings. Dave, you're highest on him at running back 9. You're a big Pacheco truther, so I'll let you get your points in here at the end. Oh, he's wearing his Pacheco shirt. All the more reason to head on over to YouTube and watch our channel. You get to see what we're wearing. Sometimes Dave, he dresses sexy for us, with his Isaiah Pacheco shirt. um, so with Isaiah Pacheco, the thing is here is last year we saw there was tons of volume for him. He was 4th in rushing share, only behind Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, Joe Mixon. I could have gone with any of those other guys. The thing is, Josh Jacobs goes to Green Bay, where we know they like to run a two-back system. Saquon Barkley goes to a good offense, don't get me wrong, but a quarterback who runs a ton and could take some of those goal line carries. Joe Mixon is going to be on a very pass-heavy offense that has added so many weapons there. It could be very similar to Cincinnati. We don't know. But I went with Pacheco here because I do think, like we talked about with Kansas City, this offense is going to be phenomenal. And really, you look at that depth chart. Who else are they giving the ball to, man? Like, it's not Clyde Edwards-Helaire. It's really not. And after the slow start that Isiah Pacheco had, also mostly because of injury, he was injured coming
Mhm.
into the season and injured throughout camp. And then when he started going and getting a little hot throughout the season, the first 8 games, he went from a 53% snap share. And then for the remaining 6, a 71% snap share. On top of that, the guy ended up just being very instrumental in the playoff run as the Chiefs go to the Super Bowl. And that's one of those things that coaches and GMs, staff, they really cling on to. Who helped us win? Or vice versa. They always think of like what made us lose. And that's what they try to draft or get in free agency. And Isiah Pacheco was that rock for them in the running game. And what I love here is that this is a team who's going to have better wide receivers on the team. And it's so weird to say this, that Patrick Mahomes' team felt one dimensional last year, but they kind of were. And now with the better receivers, it just simply means defenses are going to have to prepare for more. They won't be able to crowd the boxes. They won't be able, not they ever really were, but the running lanes are going to be so much bigger for a guy like Isiah Pacheco. And so you're talking about a player that's got this high floor, high touchdown ceiling, right? And we know touchdowns are fluky. They can go back and forth, but he's got an easy path to top 10, to being top 10 in running back touches. He's going to be in a top 5, maybe top 3 offense. And I could potentially get him in the 4th round, you know, as a guy who can easily finish. Dave, you and I both have him ranked as a running back 1, and we don't have to draft him that way. I'm in on that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I think Pacheco has a lot of the red flags of like a dead zone running back. He doesn't have great draft capital. We're looking at the depth chart and saying, well, who else is going to touch the ball? And we're projecting a lot of volume his way right now, but I don't care. Like, yeah, sure, maybe he has some red flags as a dead zone running back, but every year we see guys come out of that running back dead zone and smash. And I think that's what Isiah Pacheco is going to do. Like, you look at this guy, he's just kind of the identity of this offense. Of course, Patrick Mahomes is the true identity. Like, he gets it done, but like they rely on Pacheco so much to just get the ball into his hands and let him wear down defenses. Like you talked about, like they can't stack the front on him because of how dangerous Patrick Mahomes is. And that shows. Last year, average defenders in the box just 6.8. That was 35th among running backs. So even though he's getting a lot of the early down work, he's still running against mostly light fronts. Um, yeah, I mean, I can go back and forth talking about the concerns about Isiah Pacheco, but at the end of the day, he is a good running back that has the respect of the coaching staff on one of the league's best offenses. It's crazy to me that we're able to get Isiah Pacheco as cheap as we can in drafts this year.
The thing that I think about when it comes to those dead zone running backs that you mentioned, and dead zone is just simply where they're being drafted, and it seems kind of like the value it's not quite there. You just end up taking these guys because there's no other players to take. For those who are not too familiar with what dead zone means, the thing with a lot of those dead zone running backs is that it ended up being running backs that were getting volume that were maybe not in good situations or not in good offenses. Whereas, yeah, Isaiah Pacheco might meet that criteria of the dead zone running back, but this is potentially the best offense in the NFL, or at least top 3. And I don't think we come across this all that often, where there's just a guy getting this kind of like uh, unbridled volume in such a good offense. So we're just like, eh, we'll keep him as a running back 13. Like we'll push him down a little bit, and maybe just the receiving side's not the receiving upside isn't there, but the touchdown upside is, the volume is there. Talented player. Yeah, I'm in on this. Dave, let's go. Let's go over to the wide receivers for our final 2 players, and this is so uncharacteristic of you and I. We're looking at some
Yeah.
olds in terms of football, not for the earth. Dave, Cooper Cup is who you want to talk about here as one of your safest wide receivers in fantasy football, and this one to me is so intriguing because I've been in a lot of drafts, whether it's Best Ball or Scott Fish Bowl or whatever, and I have not found myself clicking on Cooper Cup's name despite where I have him ranked. I am just too much of a coward. Average draft position right now has him at wide receiver 22. I've got him ranked at wide receiver 24. You've got him ranked at wide receiver 28 in half PPR. That's at least that's what Football Guy says. Maybe that has been updated, but I'm still curious. Make this case for Cooper Kupp as a safe wide receiver because I'm scared.
Well, first of all, I want to say the risk with Cooper Cup is obvious that he just falls off the age cliff and that his injuries from last year bleed into this year. And I think that's all baked into his price. But I just want to kind of spell some misconceptions about
Mm.
Cooper Cup. And I think that there's this idea that he isn't going to be able to get it done now that Puka Nakua is there, the perceived wide receiver one. But we just have to look, going into last season, Cooper Cup was coming off the two arguably like most ridiculous seasons we've ever seen in back-to-back years, where this guy was just like a 20 point per game machine every single week. And then last year was inarguably a big disappointment. Even though it was a disappointment, he was still a per game wide receiver too. That is counting for a game where he was severely limited in week 11. He only had one target, 27% of the team snaps. You take that game out of the picture though, and he was averaging 14.8 points per game last year. I mean, that's the same production you were getting from guys like Chris Olave. I mean, he was giving us top 20 wide receiver production last year. He saw 8+ targets in seven of the 11 games that he played. He saw 10+ targets in 4 of the 11 games that he played. And like I said, there's obviously some concern about his age and his injury history and how Puka Nakua will impact him, but he's still getting high end usage when he's on the field. He pulls a target on 25.6% of his routes. That was 17th best among all receivers. He had a 25.6% target share last year, 16th best among all receivers. You look at how he was used in the red zone, he had the ninth most targets in the red zone among all wide receivers. He had more targets, receptions, and touchdowns than Puka Nakua did inside the 20-yard line. So as long as he's on the field, he's still a must-start option. And the risk, of course, is the injury history and the age and those things. And that is accounted for in my rankings. But when I'm talking about safety with Cooper Cup, it when you talk about floor, every player's floor is that they go out the first snap of the season and they pull an Aaron Rodgers. I mean, that's just, let's face it, that's like the floor of any player. But it's so hard to project injury and predict injury that I am just going to assume that if he is healthy, we're still going to be getting high end wide receiver two numbers from Cooper Cup next year.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people forget he was coming out into this season injured. Like there was stuff that he was already
Offseason
dealing with, and
hamstring. Yep.
so yeah, like it wasn't something, and like you say, and Chris Harris say, injury begets more injury. Like it does happen. And it's so interesting to look here because in some of these games, taking a look at it, where Cooper Cup did not get the volume or get the production, the catch rate was really, really low. And on some of those, it's games where Matthew Stafford wasn't involved, or it was games where the Rams got absolutely, shellacked. Like there's 20-43 loss to the Dallas Cowboys, and that is one of Cooper Cup's worst games of the season. And then when you look, when Matthew Stafford's on, the team is winning. It's like everything was directly correlated to, was Matthew Stafford playing? Was the Rams offense playing well? Like, were they winning? Oh yeah, Cooper Cup was putting up top 12 numbers, and he did it so often. And I think that was really the first time that we saw sort of a volatile season from Cooper Cup. But the good thing was that the volatility could be explained. It was
Yep.
injury, or it was a mishap from the quarterback play, stuff like that. It wasn't just that all of a sudden he has dropped off a cliff. And like you said, it wasn't necessarily that Puka Nakua showed up and Cooper Cup was dust. Like that's not it at all.
And that's the thing. I think when both of these guys are healthy, this could be one of those like if Cooper Cup and Puka Nakua and Matthew Stafford, if all three of them are healthy for a full 17 game season, it wouldn't surprise anybody if Nakua and Cup both finish inside the top 12. I mean, we know these are both good
Oh yeah.
players. The concerns are obviously about the injury that's baked into his ADP, and that's why I'm a little bit lower on him in rankings than others as well, because I do get scared off by older wide receivers. But if he's healthy, we're still going to be getting elite usage. And hopefully, with that elite usage comes elite production.
Yeah, I think we could be looking at something very similar to what we see in Miami with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, with potentially a better offense, a better quarterback play. It just all depends on if players are healthy. and
Now
accurate.
it's obviously like the outlier scenario. This doesn't happen, but we just saw last year. Keenan Allen was a guy who had been a wide receiver one machine, and then in
Mhm.
2022 he got injured, started falling into the fourth and fifth round of drafts, and then bounced back last year. The only thing that changed from 2022 to 2023 was that Keenan Allen stayed healthy, and when he was healthy, he was giving us top three wide receiver numbers. Now, that's obviously the outlier. Typically, when we see wide receivers getting older and start trending down and picking up injuries, that kind of snowballs over the next couple of years until they inevitably retire. But I think Keenan Allen is kind of the best case scenario. What we saw from him and the way he rebounded in 2023 shouldn't surprise anybody if Cooper Cup does that in 2024.
Yeah. I mean, you did a good job making the case here. I think I'm still too much of a coward to draft Cooper Cup. Anyway, I'm going to go to the last player that we're talking about here. And this is, I mean, dude, he might be the most consistent wide receiver in fantasy football history and NFL history. Mike Evans. Mike Evans, he's got an average draft position of wide receiver 14, being drafted in the third round, late third round right now. I've got him as the wide receiver 13. Dave, you've got him as the wide receiver 14. So we're right on par with average draft position. And it's not just that he's consistent, that we know what the floor is. We know how talented he is. It's a guy who's just been 1,000-yard receiver every single year of his career. It doesn't matter who the quarterback is. It doesn't matter who the other skill players are. It really doesn't matter. And last year we saw Baker Mayfield really, really liked Mike Evans. He was slinging the ball downfield at a better rate than he has been in his career. And it really benefited Mike Evans. We saw kind of a similar thing that we did when Jameis Winston was out there chucking the ball deep, and it got Tom Brady to throw the ball deep, was just having Mike Evans there. So it really hasn't mattered who the quarterback is. And so last season, Mike Evans, 25% target share, was his highest in 8 years. Like you said, we typically don't see that with these old receivers where they have this renaissance of I'm getting a lot more volume and I'm creating these explosive plays, but he was so much so that the Bucks said, we want you to retire a Buccaneer. We are going to give you the contract extension. And he remains one of the top weapons in their offense. They didn't go out and really get a whole bunch on offense. I know they did draft Jalen McMillan, but this is not a player that's coming in and unseating Mike Evans or Chris Godwin for that matter. So Evans still remains the top weapon there. And I think the biggest thing for people who are always like, who's the safest guy? Like, just tell me who to draft. It's going to give me X amount of points and I can plug him in my lineup every week. Mike Evans doesn't miss games. And we talk so much about that with Cooper Cup, where like there is the worry about injury, and that does come up with every player, right? Like knock on wood, like Mike Evans is not, he's not excluded from that talk, but he hasn't really missed games in his career. He's had the double-digit touchdowns in 3 of his last 4 seasons, 1,000 yards receiving in all 10 seasons of his career. He has never finished outside of the top 24 wide receivers. So we go back to what's the worst that could happen? We've seen it. We've seen it. He's never finished outside the top 24. Now, everything could fall apart in Tampa. That's always a possibility. But Evans has been a top 12 wide receiver in 6 of the last 8 seasons. There's not many players in fantasy football with a track record like that. It's not even just a matter of him being a wide receiver, too. It's that the floor is so incredibly high that you feel comfortable taking him exactly where he is. He's probably not giving you those top 5 numbers like a CeeDee Lamb or a Jamar Chase, but you know what you're getting with him. And wide receiver 18 in points per game was his worst finish of his career. We know the floor. We know the worst case scenario. Now it's a matter of how high can the ceiling be. I think I'm very, very comfortable, and maybe that's the word, and maybe that's the enemy of fantasy football success is comfort. But I'm really comfortable drafting him where he's going. If I see him there in the late third round, or even if he falls to the fourth, because people are saying I don't want old wide receivers, cool. I will gladly take Mike Evans.
And the weird thing with Evans too is that like when he got paired up with Tom Brady, one of the best quarterbacks of all time, he saw a dip in production. And that's because Tom Brady is willing to get everybody involved. He's going to find the open guy. Now with Baker Mayfield back in the picture, Mayfield, skews on the spectrum where you have like technician, surgeon type of quarterback play from Tom Brady. And then you've got Jameis Winston, who is just going to close his eyes and huck the ball downfield as hard as he can. Baker Mayfield is a little bit closer to this end of the spectrum, and I think that that is good for Mike Evans, and we saw that. The last year with Jameis Winston, Mike Evans Mike Evans averaged over 95 yards per game. Then the very next season, when he gets linked up with Tom Brady, that drops to 62 yards per game, and we
That's
saw
nuts.
him not giving as consistent of production, not getting as high of a target share. But we saw last year that Mike Evans is clearly the preferred target for Baker Mayfield, and he's going to get a lot more opportunities to score big plays. He's going to get a lot more downfield opportunities. So I think that as crazy as it sounds to say this, I think that Mike Evans is now in a better situation with Baker Mayfield than he was for the last few years with Tom Brady.
Nuts. Just absolutely nuts to say that. But yeah, you might be right. You might be right, man. Well, there we go. We got 8 different players, 2 from each position, by the way. Totally unintentional. I love that we were able to organize it like that. So, it gives a little something for everybody here for what we are deeming as the safest players. I'm doing my Dr. Evil air quotes here. Safest players in fantasy football. And we're going to be back again on Friday. We're going to keep giving you guys all kinds of different topics that we can here as we lead up to fantasy football and the drafts that are coming up. Late August, Dave? Late August, early September is really when we're going to be right in the heart of fantasy football drafts. So it's approaching. It's approaching quickly here, man. We're not
Really
too far
quickly.
away. Yeah,
Really quickly.
it's kind of nuts. We are switching now to 3 episodes a week, so that's a nice change for us. We're going to be giving you guys more shows, more content, more of us. So if you like us, that's great. If you don't like us, keep hate watching or hate listening because it's been fantastic. So keep it going. Like I said, 3 more shows each week here as we get closer to the season. Make sure you subscribe to the daily news updates from Football Guys. Everything you need to win in fantasy football sent straight to your email inbox every day by Joe Bryant himself. For myself, for Dave Kluge, I want to thank you guys for watching and listening all the way through. We'll see you next time. Adios.